And we're live. Welcome to Comp and Coffee. I'm your host, Sean Lavana. And we're hitting on a favorite topic of mine this week, something that I really enjoy ranting about on a daily basis, which is the 3% salary budgets. And we're doing this on the backs of our newly released and free salary budget survey, which you can download on our website. Just go to payfactors.com. You'll see a banner on the top. You can go download that for free. I'm joined today by Heather Kretschmer, Senior Compensation Consultant at PayFactors, and Jim Marisco, Compensation Analyst at PayFactors. And as always, the good Bill Coleman.
Hello, Sean.
There's the NPR voice we all know and love. So we have a lot to cover today, but I wanted to start. Heather, let's start with you. What were the main findings of the survey?
So I think this year, yet again, we're seeing that our merit budgets are hovering around 3%, a little above. So even as the economy is continuing to be strong and the job market's good, we're still finding that most companies are their salary budgets are staying around 3%. We continuously find that the cost of living adjustments are actually not as high as they used to be, and at this point, only about 30% of companies who participated in this survey actually provide cost of living adjustments, and most companies are now moving towards a merit-based structure, so they're paying more for performance, and we have over 90% of companies that said they do merit adjustments.
And we've had a lot of talks about that recently, Bill. One of the reasons that you've speculated that's the case, and I'm not putting words in your mouth here, is that as you look, as more states and more municipalities roll out fair pay acts, that's going to become even more common.
Yes, merit is going to become a bigger and bigger component of pay and changes in pay.
So how are they differentiating when we ask the survey in between cost of living versus salary increase?
So the study, the way it's defined is that merit adjustment is based on performance. So it's based on the job you're doing and how you're doing in that role, as opposed to cost of living adjustments, which are sort of blanket. Everyone gets this 1%, 2%, no matter what your role is and no matter what your performance is.
But across the board, on average, we saw about a 3% increase, almost regardless of industry and regardless of geography.
Yes, yep, and level within the organization as well.
You guys, actually, all three of you have been in compensation for a while. How long has that been the trend?
I think I think probably the last 10 or so years would be my guess. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and we're finding every year, people are so excited to get the study, and but still, it's a little bit higher. It's trending up a little bit, just over 3%. And I think a couple years ago it was hovering around 2.7, right. 2.6. So it's moving up, but nothing substantial at this point.
What was it historically?
I mean, it's been in that 3% for years and years, and then you have to go back to when there was a big boom in either inflation or the economy when it was higher. And I think, I would guess, going back into the sort of late 80s, early 90s was probably the last time that there was something significantly bigger than 3% as a general increase rate. And probably back in the 70s when it was lower than 2%.
But by now, all economic indicators would say that we're actually in a better market, a better economy, a better labor market than we were in the late 90s. Unemployment's lower.
And the economy is strong.
Economy's stronger.
The economy was pretty strong in the mid-90s. But also companies are, as Heather is saying, companies are focusing less on cost of living, which is an entitlement,
guaranteed,
and more on performance, and also companies have moved a lot more towards pay for performance programs, which is different from what Heather was talking about, where more and more of the employees at a given company are eligible for bonuses or other merit-based awards, not strictly added to their base pay or tied to their base pay.
So in other words, people might be making more on average, but it's not coming out in a salary budget survey.
Correct, and they may make more this year and not more next year, because it depends both on the national economy, the regional economy, and then the performance of your specific company. If your company's not doing well, it doesn't matter how good the economy is, bonuses are going to be smaller, or at least for the majority of the employees.
So we've had this talk on here before. Like I said, this is a favorite topic of mine to rant about, which is that's 3% every year. But I guess I'll ask the question, do we believe that that's a problem?
Well, I think as the economy continues to be strong and the job market remains competitive, I think some employers are finding it hard to balance these small budgets with keeping and retaining their top talent and trying to come up with creative ways to keep that talent as they're getting more competitive in the market. So that's kind of what we wanted to talk about today, just a little bit about thinking outside the box of these 3% cost of or 3% merit budgets and how companies can sort of better allocate their dollars to ensure that they're keeping their top talent.
So what are those ways? So we see this, right? So
Yeah.
and we were just talking about this. So it's harder than ever to find the right people for the job, right?
Yep.
Massive labor shortage plus jobs, some jobs. People say they're having trouble finding the right people to hire is because of very specialized or very specific knowledge that's needed.
Yep.
Right. So wouldn't that mean then that you want to pay the people that are top performers, harder to find,
Yep.
more?
Yep. Well, and I think what's happening is a lot of companies, as much as we're moving away from that cost of living, I guess language that we're using, a lot of companies are still looking at their employee population and thinking we have this 3% budget, we should give everyone a 3% merit. And, while some companies are sort of shifting and thinking, okay, instead of looking at a 3% budget for each individual, we should be looking at a total pool of money we have and how we can spend that money, whether we're looking at our top talent, we're looking at our underpaid top performers, and trying to figure out how to take this one pool of money and make sure that we're allocating it appropriately. Instead of paying people who are already paid above the market, giving them 3% adjustment, is that as effective as giving someone who's overperforming underpaid, say a 5, 6, 7% adjustment?
And this is one of the key things that I want to talk about today, which is where's that budget coming from? I'll ask you, Jim, the clients you work with, right? When they start to model this, do they say, for example, well, I'll just use basic numbers. I have employees that make $100,000, low number I know. We're going to give them a 3% raise this year. So we're going to allocate that additional $3,000. And then to the point you were just making, Heather, then it would be up to each manager, for example, to say, well, here's the 3% that you'd be giving otherwise, but if you want to give more to a top performer, you can do that. You still have to stay within this range. How do you see your clients?
Yeah, so I think you have to take into consideration employees that are paid very high, are senior in their career, may have been redlined at this point of their career. Do they really get that increase when they're already paid so high? And you have sort of employees performing at the same level, but that are at a lower salary, that are moving their way up the ladder. Should they get a higher increase, around 3 to 4 or 5%, while the higher employees maybe at this point they're already capped out and aren't receiving that larger increase in salary.
I guess what I'm specifically trying to get at, though, which is helpful from the manager's point of view, if you will, does this money, this budget increase, does it come top down? Does the CFO, for example, or the board come and say, you have $20,000 to allocate this year? Or is it, say, for example, a compensation person or a manager saying, I have this team of 10. I believe that there's top performers that I want to make sure I hold on to. Some of them might be getting a $10,000 raise. Others might be getting nothing. But here's my recommended budget for my team, and then you kind of go the rounds on that? Or is it just literally you have this pool, figure out what you want to do with it?
I think it sort of goes both ways. Compensation has to communicate heavily with the finance department and overall to determine how much money they have to pay people, or from an organizational standpoint, are they budgeting more so in other areas of the company, such as research and development, or where are they putting their extra capital? As we stated earlier, the economy is getting better. There's more capital that's out in the economy, so employers are deciding really what to do with the money, and they have to look and say, okay, well, what is more important, retaining employees and compensating them more, or are they using those money for other facets of business?
Other investment areas, sure. So let's assume we have this budget. what's the ideal way to understand where you should place your, for lack of a better word, place your bets?
Well, I think there's a couple factors that come into play here. The one being performance. I think also too, this is why having access to market data is so important now, and so many companies are realizing the value of having market data is because they want to see how their employees are paid relative to the market. So if they have employees who are already paid competitively for the job they're doing, it may end up that they don't need to be continuously giving them merit adjustments, as opposed to people who are underpaid in the market. That's probably where they want to focus their money.
And I think another question that a lot of managers will ask themselves, who can I not afford to lose?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's where you see, or you know, who is likely to be poached or who is in the process of being poached by one of my competitors. Yeah. And those are the first people you want to think about how much you're allocating to.
Yeah.
For sure. So good market data, more key than ever.
Yes.
Right? How would you go about looking at that then? Say, let's break it down. Say you have a high performer versus a low performer. From a compensation standpoint, where would you start?
I think you look at your top performers and you look at the top performers who are underpaid relative to market, and that should be your priority area. That, along with who you can't afford to lose and what, and the roles that they're in and how those are paying in the market. And then I think, if you have people who are just mediocre performers paid at market, I think those need to be your low. Those are, should be low priority in terms of, can you take the merit dollars that are sort of have been allocated to them and allocate it elsewhere? And, it's sort of a shift in the mindset of a lot of employers to move away from just giving everyone an adjustment, and that the assumption that everyone needs to get an adjustment every year. Because if you're paid relative to market for the job you're doing and you're not a top performer, it doesn't necessarily mean that you should be getting any sort of merit adjustments, since merit adjustments, the idea behind them is that you're paying for your performance.
I think that's a critical point. I think most employees, at least in my experience, do expect that. They do expect, oh, it's a new year, I'm going to get a raise, let's have my performance review. Oh, it was good, I get whatever, 5%. It was bad, I get 1%, but I'm still getting that increase.
Yeah, and I think it's shifting to, you have to think about, okay, so giving 10 people a 1% adjustment, yes, you're doing something for everyone, and you're sort of keeping maybe a lot of people complacent, but is it more effective to maybe give 4, 5, 6% to a handful of employees and making them, really making them excited about what they're doing and their value in the company?
Sure, keep your top people motivated to the extent that you can.
Exactly.
But also make sure that, to the point where you're saying, you're not going to lose anybody because they feel like they're underpaid, or at least anybody that you're not willing to lose.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, having been a manager before and used one of these many compensation planning tools, one thing that is challenging is when you get this tool, effectively an Excel spreadsheet, where you get your 3% budget and it just allocates 3% to each person. Just the human nature as you look at it, and Heather just sort of said it this way also, is I've got to take money away from one person to give somebody else more. Mm-hmm. And that's hard to do. And so when you start with everybody getting an even 3%, the results, in my experience, is that you have less variation across the team. Whereas if you start with everybody at 0% and then you start allocating, in an order that makes sense by looking at who's either most underpaid or most, in need of a monetary incentive, and then see what's left.
Yeah,
and sort of go step by step through your team.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was referencing to, having a pool of money as opposed to a 3% budget. You're saying, I have $1,000 that I can allocate between, 3 employees, instead of saying, okay, I have $300 for each employee. It's, thinking of it in terms of this pool of money, how is this going to be most well spent?
Let me ask you this, though, Bill, in all your experience, is there a way then for this to get flipped on its head so that it's not being what I would call in this instance reactive? Here's your pool of money. And more proactive, here's what we would like to do in order to get the top performers, whatever, at or above a market rate, and give other people a raise or not.
Yes, although I think you need a company that's either not sort of rigidly programmatically controlled from the top, where every event has a time and a place, and everything is coming from the top down, and or you have management or managers who are open to the idea of a team lead coming in and saying, I need to make adjustments for people. And I think what you normally see is people looking at promotions as another vehicle or device that gets you into a different conversation. So you can take somebody off of the 3% across the board program and into the, is this person in the right job? Because a promotion, you can get a fairly significant increase and you get a good psychological and energy step up from your top performers, or, people who are maybe, as Jim was referring to, people who are redlined. Are they sort of at the top of their band and the top of their capacity? Or are they at the top of their band and it's time for them to move up?
They could become a manager. They could become a director.
Right.
They become
They could become the next thing.
Yep.
Right. And Bill, off of that as well, it's interesting to note that promotional increases in and of themselves may technically not be recorded in salary budget surveys, as clients may not refer to the standard 3% increase year in and year out as a promotional increase. And it's also been seen today that there are more promotions sort of occurring to engage employees, even if the promotions themselves aren't as significant or large as they were historically. There are more of those sort of smaller promotions that occur. And so if there is any more of a 3% increase, say it's 6 or 7%, there is more increases in salary that may be occurring, but they're just not being captured directly in the salary budget survey.
It's true, like the millennial effect, or the everybody gets a trophy. It's you get promoted every year now because so you go from accountant 1 to accountant 1.5 to accountant 2.
You see it a lot now, where there's these incremental steps that everybody just keeps taking, so that it's a motivating factor, like we were just talking about. But does that raise the question?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Go ahead.
It does raise the question.
Is it? Damn it. No. Does that raise the question? Is this an effective means to garner what's really going on out there in the economy? Do we care about a salary budget survey anymore if it's 3% every year? And what we're saying is there's all these other workarounds now for giving people their quote unquote rightful increases.
I'd want to be careful about using the word workarounds, but there are like other avenues. But yeah, I
Can't
think
just play this fast and loose.
Okay, fast and loose. It's a workaround. Losing my NPR voice.
That's my goal. I finally accomplished my goal. Yeah. Done. I'm out. Thank you guys for being on the podcast. I think the market will dictate trends and policies. Companies will start doing things differently, and that to reflect the idea that jobs are sort of narrower and therefore promotions are more frequent. They're more frequent, but that when I started my career, first promotion was like a 25% salary increase. Now gosh. I'm guessing it's like, I think sort of what Jim was referring to, like around
7%.
10 tops, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Between 5 and 7.
Because you're not moving up. I mean, my first promotion was like 2 or 2.5 years into the job.
A lot more effort into it.
Right. It was a much bigger step. Now they're smaller steps. They happen more frequently. That makes sense. And that will, over time, I think the salary budget survey concept will reflect that. And the salary budget surveys will probably start to include structure movement and
percentage promoted.
Percentage promoted, and average, like total salary increase from last year to this, not just
a more reflective view of what actually happened as opposed to a single.
The people staying in the job within the band, and, just sort of moving from the left to the right of their current structure.
I think over the course of the last decade, with coming out of the recession of 2008, employers have gotten so used to finding other avenues of compensation. Variable pay is huge. Having all these other fringe benefits and perks, and healthcare costs have also risen. So there's all these other facets when you're looking at total rewards for from an overall view that, the 3% salary budget increase is only one facet of compensation. And I think when people get used to doing the same thing year over year, 3% increase, that it's a lot of times easier for companies to use these different avenues of compensation in order to both retain and engage employees, but also have a great company culture and stay financially secure as well.
Yeah, you're hitting on the topic of total rewards, which is why that's emerged more as a overall trend than comp and benefits, right? It's the combination of those two that becomes more powerful. Mm-hmm. So that if you are just giving a 3% raise, it's, hey, by the way, but we're also matching your 401k, and we pay for your health care, and you get pet insurance, and here's the value of all that as well to you.
Yep. And especially now, too, where there's certain, like, hot jobs where the skill set, there's such an added value that companies are having to come up with creative ways to move the base on, people in certain roles as opposed to other parts of the organization, and balancing that as well.
And that also correlates with the industry sector that had the largest increase. It was internet software and services, which had a 4.2 salary budget. So
talent's hard to find.
Right, correct. So that trend's high because of all the sort of jobs you find in that sector, obviously, with the high demand for technology jobs.
And I think in a lot of surveys, and sorry for putting you guys on the spot here, but a lot of surveys, it's actually the outliers that are the most interesting part of the story. It's like who's, what industries and what jobs are the high end? Are there specific jobs that are, have a salary budget increase, 5, 6, 7, 10%? And are there other ones that are down low? I mean, to look way back in time, and very, very, very rarely do you see a negative number.
Yeah, going back to some statistics at the World at Work salary budget surveys, back between 1979 and 1980, there was a 2% jump up to 9.9%, only to drop down 2.3% between 82 and 83. So that was around a time where you had fluctuations in inflation and uncertainty in the economy.
Right.
So I think employers want to see consistency in the economy year after year to ensure that, it's not a fake economy, there isn't some sort of bubble, and then later on, when they feel more comfortable, the salary budgets, hopefully will go up.
Right. Salaries definitely lag the economy for that reason exactly. Companies want to be sure things are going well before they commit because they don't want to have to back it off.
Yep.
So what else surprised you about the survey findings? What else was interesting?
I was actually surprised at how small the percentage of budget for what fell into those other increases, since because of the how good the market is right now. I would have thought that there would have been more companies doing more like retention type bonuses, or retention increases rather. And I was surprised that those budgets were pretty low. Like everything was sort of falling into the merit or the small cost of living adjustments, but.
Yeah, I was going to say, even if you looked at what the projections are for next year, they're also not significantly larger than what actually occurred this year.
Yeah.
So the hope for the percentage going up significantly, again, it's really a waiting game to see what that number will be. And I don't know if what the ideal number should be.
But this is one of those classic things where I would argue a company can stand out by being that outlier, potentially, right? Which is that if everybody else is going up by 3%, you see those numbers staying the same, one of the ways that you can stand out would be to go up much higher than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Sort of lead the way with having a higher increase, even if it's whatever the number has to be substantial enough to stick out and say, the average is 3.1 and you come out and you're at 3.6, then you're substantially, sticking out of the crowd.
Although I think you'd have to be much higher than that.
That's a margin of error.
Right. Mm-hmm. To be for your employees to notice.
Right.
Because again, it's not the average. Everybody cares about, their own increase.
Yeah. And we may have some companies participating in the survey that do that, but it's just hard to capture them because we have so many companies
It gets averaged
participating.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'm just saying if you were looking at this from a head of HR standpoint and you're like, hey, I can't attract the right people, we have this budget that's coming down again that's going to allow me to give everybody 3% increases, right? Maybe it's time to rethink that, flip that on its head and say, what does it really take to make this, the compensation piece anyway, or even the total rewards piece, a main focal point as to we want to show our employees that we care about them. We believe that we should treat them fairly, use great market data, accurate market data, recent market data to make sure that they are paid to the higher end of our philosophy. For example, I'm just going on a rant here. And we believe that by doing all that, we can stand out as an employer of choice. And so we can get the better talent and keep them.
Yep.
Yeah,
and
I think the same philosophical thought process comes into play when you're looking at what percentile you target in standard comp surveys.
For sure.
So the standard 50% that you would target, if you're trying to target a 60%, or if you're targeting a 60th and you're going up to the 70th, over time, it may take a year or so to implement that, but then that also correlates with increasing salary budgets over time as well.
Yep.
Right. There's definitely a compounding effect is basically what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
Right, and if you can't afford or can't commit to the compounding effect, you can do one-time, with air quotes, bonuses,
Right.
which have, going back to a previous podcast, have sort of a bigger effect on the recipient because it's a big dollar amount in a single check, and that can get you some mileage with your employees. It's like, oh, look, everybody got $1,000 bonus this week. And then you can, you may or may not repeat that next year. I would generally recommend you don't keep repeating the same thing over and over again at the same time, because then it does become
Like cost of living adjustments. People just assume it's expected.
People assume it's an entitlement.
Yeah.
But you can be creative and think a little bit outside the box and not get kicked out of HR permanently.
And that's what we talked about. I was just looking it up. Episode 12, Incentives and Rewards, we covered that. Because of, and we talked about this in other episodes too, you had that trend at the beginning of the year when the tax cut in the U.S. was going into place, where a bunch of companies gave a one-time bonus with a whole lot of stipulations around it, and we talked about the fairness of that or not.
And the Mercedes.
And the Mercedes, that was the lottery reward, right? So that was one of the other things. One of the companies went through almost a raffle system. So that if you met your goals, you'd get effectively a ticket, and you entered into a raffle to get prizes. What we were just talking about, anyway, brings about that flexibility. Here's a quote-unquote one-time reward, as long as it's positioned that way, even if you start to do it somewhat annually, and maybe it varies a little bit, but that is one way to not have the compound effect, but also reward your employees for a job well done.
Right, and it doesn't have to be, I said $1,000 a person. It doesn't have to be $1,000. It doesn't have to be the same thing for every person. And depending on your budgets and your situations, it doesn't have to be for everyone. It could be the superstar bonus, or you have a high-level superstar award, and then you have a mid-level star award, and that's all you do. You just stop there.
Yep.
Anything else that you realized in the survey that was a little bit outside the norm, that was really interesting to you?
I mean, like I said, internet and software services led when you look at exempt non-management employees at 4.2% total increases. And that industry was followed by textiles, apparel, and luxury goods, followed by credit unions, and then biotechnology at 3.9, 3.8, 3.7, respectively. And that same group of industries is also leading for what is projected for next year, along with biotechnology. But again, what's planned for next year and what has occurred this year, there's no significant projected increase either way.
And we'll have to come back and do the same podcast again next year when it actually happens, and we can see what was planned to actual.
Yeah.
We will.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us today. And if you want to download the survey, again, go to our homepage. It's payfactors.com. You'll see a little banner at the top there that says Salary Budget Survey 2018 is now out. You can download it there for free.